Everybody thinks they know how this story ends. A powerful military coalition attacks a heavily sanctioned country, its leaders are targeted, its infrastructure is bombed, its economy is squeezed, and eventually the regime collapses. That was the expectation when the United States and Israel launched their campaign against Iran. But what if the exact opposite happened? What if the war didn't break Iran? What if it transformed it? And what if the most important consequence of this conflict isn't what was destroyed, but what emerged afterward? Because today we are going to explore a possibility that many policymakers in Washington, Tel Aviv, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Beijing, and Brussels are increasingly being forced to consider: not a defeated Iran, not a collapsed Iran, but an adapted Iran, a more nationalist Iran, a more militarized Iran, a more strategically confident Iran, and potentially a much bigger challenge for the Middle East than the one that existed before the war began. Stay with me because by the end of this video you will understand why the real battle may only be beginning. Welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy deep dive geopolitical analysis covering energy markets, global trade, great power competition, and the future of the Middle East, make sure to subscribe. Now let's begin. Lesson 1. The assumption that never worked. The first thing we need to understand is that regime change has one of the worst track records in modern geopolitics. Time and again, powerful nations convince themselves that enough military pressure will cause an adversary to collapse. The logic appears straightforward. Destroy infrastructure, eliminate senior leaders, create economic pain, encourage public dissatisfaction, and eventually the government falls. But history rarely behaves so neatly. Think about Britain during World War II. The Blitz did not break British morale. Think about North Vietnam. Years of bombing failed to force surrender. Think about Afghanistan. After 20 years of military operations, the Taliban returned to power. This doesn't mean military force never works. It means political systems often react to pressure in unexpected ways. And that brings us to Iran. Before the war, many observers saw Iran as weak. The economy was struggling. Young people were frustrated. Public protests had erupted repeatedly. The government appeared increasingly unpopular. Many analysts concluded that the system was brittle, but weakness and collapse are not the same thing. A state can be weak, a state can be unpopular, a state can be economically damaged, and yet still survive. In some cases, external pressure actually strengthens the state, and that's where this story becomes interesting. Lesson 2. The generation that took over. One of the most overlooked consequences of war is generational change. When people think about Iran, they often imagine elderly clerics and revolutionary slogans from 1979, but a new generation has been rising inside Iran's political and security institutions. This generation was not shaped by the revolution. They were shaped by sanctions, regional conflict, cyber warfare, economic crisis, military planning. They think differently. The old leadership often saw itself as guardians of a revolution. The emerging leadership increasingly sees itself as managers of a state. That sounds like a subtle distinction. It's not. Revolutionary governments focus on ideology. Security states focus on power. Revolutionary leaders often talk about historical grievances. Security elites talk about leverage. Revolutionary systems seek validation. Security systems seek survival. And survival changes everything. If this transition is real, then the Iran emerging from the war may be fundamentally different from the Iran that entered it. Not necessarily more moderate, not necessarily more democratic, but potentially more effective. And that should concern both supporters and opponents of the regime. Lesson 3. The Strait of Hormuz. Now we arrive at what may be the single most important issue in this entire story. The Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway is one of the most important energy choke points on Earth. Massive volumes of oil and LNG pass through it every day. For decades, policymakers assumed that sanctions represented the primary source of leverage over Iran. But what if Tehran learned a different lesson? What if Iranian strategists concluded that sanctions can come and go, Negotiations can succeed or fail, but geography is permanent. Think about that. Iran cannot control Washington. Iran cannot control sanctions. Iran cannot control global financial markets. But Iran can influence one of the world's most important energy arteries. If Iranian leaders increasingly view Hormuz as their primary strategic asset, the implications are enormous. This isn't just about Iran. This affects energy markets, shipping, insurance, inflation, global trade, LNG buyers in Asia, manufacturers in Europe. Many investors treated Hormuz disruptions as temporary risks. But what if they become structural risks? What if geopolitical premiums become a permanent feature of energy markets? That possibility alone should command attention. Lesson 4. The China Connection. There is another major consequence that receives far less attention: China. For years, there remained at least some hope inside Iran that relations with the West could eventually improve. Maybe sanctions would be lifted, maybe normalization would occur, maybe economic reintegration was possible. But repeated confrontations have weakened that belief. And when one door closes, another often opens. If Iranian leaders conclude that the United States will remain hostile regardless of concessions, then China becomes increasingly attractive. Not because Beijing will rescue Iran, not because China wants war, but because China offers something equally important: markets, investment, infrastructure, technology, diplomatic support. The result could be a deeper strategic relationship between China and Iran, and that would have implications far beyond the Middle East, because now the story becomes part of the broader competition between Washington and Beijing. Lesson 5. The nationalism factor. Perhaps the most surprising development is what happened inside Iran itself. Many people assumed that economic pain and political dissatisfaction would eventually turn society against the government. Those frustrations certainly existed, and many still exist today. But war changes political psychology. Throughout history, populations under external attack often rally around national identity. Even people who dislike their government may support resistance against a foreign adversary. This doesn't mean everyone suddenly supports the regime. Far from it. Economic grievances remain, political tensions remain, social divisions remain, but nationalism can temporarily reorder priorities, and that appears to be one of the most important dynamics emerging from this conflict. The question is whether Iranians became pro-government. The question is whether external pressure strengthened national solidarity enough to stabilize the system. If it did, then the strategic consequences could last for years. Now we arrive at the central question: did the war create a stronger Iran? The honest answer is that nobody knows. Iran has suffered enormous damage. Its economy faces serious challenges. Its infrastructure needs rebuilding. Its regional network has been weakened. Those realities are undeniable. But another reality may also be true. Wars often create adaptations. States learn, militaries evolve, institutions change, political systems adjust. History shows that countries frequently emerge from major conflicts looking very different from how they entered them. And that's why the most important question may not be who won the last battle. The most important question may be what kind of Iran emerges over the next decade. Because if the conflict produces a more disciplined leadership, a stronger nationalist identity, deeper ties with China, and a greater willingness to use geographic leverage through the Strait of Hormuz, then policymakers may eventually conclude that the war achieved something very different from what its architects intended. The greatest strategic mistake in history is often misidentifying the scoreboard. Victory is not always measured by the number of targets destroyed. Sometimes it's measured by the political system left standing afterward. And that may ultimately be the defining question of this conflict. Did the war weaken Iran, or did it create a new Iran? A question that will shape the Middle East, global energy markets, and international politics for years to come. Let me know what you think in the comments. Did the war leave Iran weaker or stronger? And what do you think the region will look like 5 years from now? If you enjoyed this analysis, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.